This has been an art adventure for many, many days now. Art and winter weather. We're talking about, art in the wilds of New England. Because when it was just a storm, just a blizzard, and we had to get trucks from Vancouver and from London, that was one thing. Yesterday, we had busloads of people sort of coming out to the museum, intrepid art adventurers. So it's really, really great to have everyone here. I know you've made an effort to be here given the weather. We have the opportunity to spend some time with Parviz Tanavoli. It's an amazing thing to have the master with us and to have the occasion to honor him in relation to the first U.S. museum retrospective of his work. This means that his last solo exhibition in the U.S. was in 1976, and that's a long time. And we've had the amazing good fortune, with Parviz's help, to kind of open a door on 60 years of art making. We have a gallery full of about 185 objects, a beautiful range of works, arrayed around a centerpiece, which I like to think of as the Heach Garden, organized thematically and chronologically to think about the ways that he's approached subjects that recur throughout those 60 years, topics that take him, myths and legends and inventiveness that keeps him going. That gives you a sense of both time passing and invention through material. So you all will have the opportunity to see the exhibition in a few minutes, but while we're together, we figured that we would take some time to talk about the exhibition, about Parviz's career, about all of the things that came together in this project. I think that many of you may have heard of, but have not yet met, Maryam Eisler, who's at the far end in the green. Maryam is class of 1989, and she's a Wellesley College trustee. And over the past few years, she has very generously given a gift to the Davis and the art department that allows us to undertake projects, ambitious, cross-disciplinary projects located around art of the Middle East. This is a unique circumstance. It is the product of a visionary who is demonstrating a kind of leadership with regard to art at the center of critical thinking, curatorial practice, scholarship, and study, in a way I think that it simply does not exist at any other institution. The Eisler Fund is going to give us opportunities that were previously unimaginable, and I think when I look at Maryam, I think, oh, this is the person who makes real what was previously unimaginable. So we are extremely grateful to her. This project with Parviz is the first under the auspices of the Eisler Fund, and we're all gathered here today as a result. So we are enormously proud. Thank you, Maryam. I want to also recognize Shiva Balaghi, who is here in the beautiful dress. Co-curator on the project, co-conspirator, I like to say. Shiva is a historian, an art historian who's been teaching for 20 years around issues in modern and contemporary art from the Middle East, and has brought tremendous expertise to bear on this project. She has been working with Parviz over decades. She's written about his work, and she's known him a long time. And what has come out of this is a sense of their deep connectedness. I mean, really, it's not just them. I will say that everyone who has participated in this project has evoked a sense of so much love for Parviz Tanavoli. From his family, his wife, Madija, and his daughter, Tandar, who are here with us. and his friends and all of the lenders to the exhibition, both personal, private people, and institutions. So I wanted to recognize those while we have time. The British Museum, particularly Venetia Porter, who was so generous, the Maryam and Edward Eisler collection, the Gray Art Gallery at NYU. You may know, or you may not know, but you will learn in the exhibition, that Abby Weed Gray was a tremendous supporter and friend to Parviz. I think they had a lifelong friendship. She purchased work from him, but also from the artists that he introduced her to throughout the region. And, you know, what an amazing thing. In the end, she had developed a collection that was unparalleled, and she gave that collection to NYU. So Shiva participated in the project that inventoried and indexed that collection, and you can see most of it online at the NYU site, at the Gray Gallery site. Layla Heller Gallery, and particularly Layla Heller, who was so helpful in this. The Meshkati Fine Art. We have the Meshkatis with us here from London. Very generous lenders to our project. The collection of Nadar and Mana Mobarga in Vancouver. The collection of Shamila and Hassan Rizvi, also tremendous collectors. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank the Davis Museum staff. You really have never seen people pull it out like this. This project came together in not the kind of lead time that one associates with major museum exhibitions, and everyone who works at the museum had a hand in its realization. Everyone has been enormously supportive and really of good cheer. And, you know, sometimes I get stressed out, I get crabby, and everyone has been incredibly good about just making the thing happen. So we owe a lot to the Davis staff. So thank you. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists, and I think Shiva is going to lead the way in starting the conversation with Parviz.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so nice to see all of you here. I know some of you would probably rather be sunbathing outside, so it's nice that you took the time to come inside. I'd like to start off, if you don't mind, for a few minutes, acting the role of the art historian and the historian, and ask us to pause for a moment and think about what a historic situation we are in. Both Lisa and Maryam Eisler are incredibly modest people, and Parviz also is an incredibly modest gentleman. So it's on me to tell you a little bit about how extraordinary the circumstance is. There is no other university anywhere, including in the Middle East, that has a program dedicated to the study of the contemporary modern Middle East that includes an art department and a museum that is platformed to be interdisciplinary. Wellesley is the first, and it's a historic moment, and everyone at Wellesley should be incredibly proud of your institution and should be incredibly grateful to Lisa Fischman and Maryam Eisler, who were not only visionary, but really implemented this very, very carefully over the course of several years. And I know this to be true because I've met with Lisa in locations from Brooklyn to London, to Amsterdam, to Dubai, to Abu Dhabi, to Paris. She goes and meets with artists and collectors and patrons and museums and art institutions, and has really gotten to know the field incredibly well. And it's through that hard work and dedication to really learning about the field of contemporary Middle East that she earned the trust of Maryam Eisler and the confidence of Maryam Eisler to be able to pull off an incredible organization that we have here today. Last spring, when we were all in Art Dubai, we saw kind of a troubling video about the way that some of Parviz Tanavoli's art was being treated in Tehran. And we all kind of felt like something needed to be done. And there was a lot of hand-wringing. And then Lisa and I were at Frieze Masters in London, and I remember specifically walking through the booths, and Lisa said, we really should do something about Parviz. And, you know, I'm thinking, yes, we should. Maybe we should write an article. You know, maybe we should write an op-ed to the New York Times, which they'll never get published, but we can write it and feel good about ourselves. And she turns around and she goes, no, we should do an exhibition. And so we said to Maryam Eisler, what do you think about doing an exhibition? And within 24 hours, she had emailed Parviz, what about doing an exhibition? And Parviz says to me, I'm sitting in Tehran, out of the blue, I get this email, you know? And of course, Lisa is this very rare combination of being incredibly passionate, but also incredibly pragmatic and incredibly professional. She's the 3 Ps all in one. And so she kind of looks through her, you know, date book, and she's like, how about February? And, you know, I'm an art historian, so I'm like, sure, February, that sounds good. And then, you know, she says to me, well, you know that museums don't loan work beyond 6 months, that you have to have a 6-month minimum to be able to loan works from museums. I'm like, oh, cool, I didn't know that. Well, we can still have an exhibition. And around the week before Thanksgiving, we were thinking of calling the show Heech, as in nothing, because we would have nothing to exhibit.
It was very, very conceptual.
Yes. And Parviz was going to do his own version of Marina, like just do like some sort of performance in an empty gallery, you know, of Heech. And then Lisa said, no, we have to do it. Because the thing about both Maryam and Lisa is they don't take no for an answer. Like, no is not an option. They both do it in a very friendly way. But, you know, I've learned to both love and fear both of them. So somehow they managed to elicit both feelings in me. And so if you follow Lisa Fischman on Instagram, you will note that she spent Thanksgiving night having dinner by herself in an Irish pub in Vancouver. This was because she spent Thanksgiving in Vancouver with the Tanavolis, whose house is now barren. Because I mean, she literally like walked away with every piece of art that they have. And then she went to London and found more works. So we ended up with an unbelievable 185 objects that represent all 6 decades of Parviz's career, except for rugs. It's against the sanctions regime to import Iranian rugs. So other than that, all of the mediums of his work, paintings, lino cuts, ceramics, jewelry, statues, sculptures. We have the biggest sculpture he's ever made. We have the heaviest sculpture he's ever made. And we have the newest sculpture he's ever made. So there's a lot of very fantastic highlights in the show. So I just want you all who, if there is in the audience a young Wellesley student, know that what you've been given is a very unique gift to be able to go into the Davis Museum and see Parviz Tanavoli's art, and then to be able to go into your classrooms and have your professors teach you about the socio-political, economic context in which that art was made, and in which that art was collected, and in which that art was exhibited. No other university student in the world has the opportunity that you all do, and it's because of Lisa and Maryam that we have this gift. So I just wanted, before we started, to just kind of make that little introduction. So now I'm going to ask the first question of Parviz. آماده؟
بله همیشه
حاضرین.
بفهمید.
It's very cute. I'm Instagramming every 5 seconds. And there are people from Iran who are Instagramming me back. And I mentioned that I was reading their notes to Parviz. And they're Instagramming me with, I'd really love to buy a Heech ring. Where can I get one? And the guy even said, I know it's probably not appropriate to ask you this, but a young woman said, you know, Ostad, they call him Ostad, which is a professor, which is a word that's used very, very respectfully in Iran, as opposed to some other cultures where you call us prof. Or yo. But one young woman wrote to him, Ostad, when I see your work, I feel all of the emotions that you put into making your art. So I wonder, what would you like that young art student in Tehran to know about the process that you go through when you create the art that we see?
Okay, thank you. Let me first welcome everyone. I'm very happy, delighted that under this weather you all made it to come here, and I'm honored. And it's not an easy question because when I'm in Iran also, all these youngsters get around me, crowd around me, and they want to know a lot about me. But I have a life full of events. And it all didn't happen overnight. And so my life divides into portion pre-revolution and after revolution. And what I learned with pre-revolution and I produced pre-revolution is one thing, and then after the revolution is another thing. Anyway, to answer that particular question is, I never gave up, and I followed my path all the way through. And in any circumstances, if I couldn't sculpt, I wrote, I made notes, I made research, I traveled. If I couldn't do that, I wrote poetry or listened to music or somehow enriched myself. And so I'm very happy for the life I have had behind. There's no regret. I think that's what made me to this point. And some people say, well, I mean, you had bad lucks because of this, because of that. I said, no, they were, at the end, not bad lucks. They were good lucks because they turned me to what I am today. Okay, if that answers it, I don't know. How can you answer that girl all these words?
So my turn to ask you a
Yes,
question.
please. Yes, please.
Your art sits very beautifully and very comfortably in both Eastern culture and Western culture. And it would be interesting, I think, for me and the audience here to, if we, for instance, take the example of the hijj, how it very easily fits within the tradition of the Persian culture, on the one hand, but also sits very comfortably in pop art.
Very good.
So
Very
would you
good.
like to comment on that, please?
Yes. Let's divide it in two sections, your question. My art fits with Western culture and Eastern culture. I'm Iranian. I'm fascinated with my culture, with Persian culture, Persian poetry, Persian architecture, and all of that. Also, I'm fascinated by Western art. I mean, I cannot live without it. Anytime I travel, I go and visit museums, contemporary art galleries, and then I studied in Iran, studied abroad, studied in Italy, in US, and so I kind of never separated the two from each other. This business of East and West never existed for me, never existed. I found no barrier between East and West. And the reason my hijj fits into the contemporary art is because of from the 60s onwards, the artists, especially American, were pioneers of that. They search for nothingness. I mean, Andy Warhol says, all I am doing is the essence of nothingness. I mean, that's very nice what he said. He said that in the 70s and in the 60s, I started to making hijj, producing the hijj. So the concept of hijj making, it's nothing national or nothing from me. It even existed ways before, even existed 1,000 years before. We have beautiful poems from Rumi, from Khayyam. They question about what hijj is. You know, if there are things, then there are nothing too. And they balance each other. The thing and no things, they balance each other. And they always question, which one is true? Is nothing true or is thing true? All those things that we see, are these the true things? Or are the things we don't see, are those the true things? So this duality between the two is like day and night, good and bad, and whatever you want to put it, I think is always occupied the mind of human being. But from the 60s onwards, I think it very much occupied the Western artists, especially began with the pop artists.
had a question reaching way back. I think when I was in the gallery and spending a lot of time in these different sections we've devised, and then I was reading books and thinking about the things that have inspired you, really taken by the story of Farhad. And I was wondering if you could tell our guests the story of Farhad and talk about what inspired you.
Okay. When I studied in Italy, I couldn't forget about Iran. You know, of course, I was studying in academia in Italy. Everything was Italian, and I had to learn, follow the academy and my master's, the class. But my mind was always in Iran. We have no tradition of sculpture in Iran. For over 1,000 years after the Islam, the tradition of sculpture died off. The sculpture was practically completely banned. So there is only one legendary figure in our literature, and that is about a mountain carver whose name was Farhad. Farhad, the mountain carver, and he was, of course, prior to Islam, just a decade or 2 decades prior we became Islam, we were conquered by Arabs. A few decades before that, Farhad was a great sculptor of the court of the Sasanian king Khosrow Parviz in the 7th century. And he made a sculpture, obviously, but none of that does exist. They all destroyed them all. There is nothing in existence. But nevertheless, in the literature, there are many poems about Farhad because he also was in love with the beloved of the king. And that's a beautiful story. The king loved his beloved so much, but he also liked his court sculptor, and he couldn't get rid of him. And so in order to, send him away from his beloved, he said, okay, I give you a mission. If you manage to accomplish this mission, you can have the hand of Shirin, my beloved. And Farhad accepted it. And the mission was to go and carve a mountain. I mean, a tunnel through a mountain by axe. And Farhad said, okay, I will do it. And he went and he managed it. And I am just shortening it. And he managed it, but the news reached the king, and when the king reached it, he was very concerned. He said, what will we do? And he asked his courtiers, and they advised him to send him a message that Shirin is dead. She has died. And upon hearing the news, he fell from the mountain and died. So this was the story of the last sculptor of Iran. This created a lot of poetry, a lot of legends in Iranian culture, in Iranian literature and poetry. For me, Farhad became like my ancestor, like my model, like my Michelangelo. And although there was no place else I put my footstep, by imagination, I thought, I have to follow his path. I want to become another Farhad and at least become follow that tradition. And when I returned to Iran, very first sculpture, even in Italy, I made sculpture of Farhad falling from the mountain. I mean, in that position. And when I returned to Iran, I made in the 58 onwards, all my exhibitions were based on the stories of the Shirin and Farhad. And of course, with different material, in different mediums, different shapes. And of course, that's another story.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about this moment in time, because you're having your first solo show in the United States in 39 years. And but you are quite familiar with American culture and the American art scene. In the early 1960s, there was a brief moment where you were living in Minnesota and teaching art there and making art there. And Siar Mejani had moved to Minnesota, and he was living there and making art there. And Marco Gregorian moved. So 3 of the leading modern artists of Iran were living in Minnesota. of all places, from in the early 1960s. And you've told me some very fascinating stories about the three of you and your interactions and the work that you did. If you could tell us some Minnesota stories, please.
Okay, that's another story. Well, when I went to Minneapolis, Minneapolis College of Art and Design, I was probably the first Iranian artist they were seeing. They hadn't seen any other artists. And I began to work there, and I even brought with me art of painting of 14 Iranian artists, and we exhibited at the college, Minneapolis College of Art. And for the first time, they saw some modern art of Iran. All they knew about Iran was Persian carpet, Persian miniature, Persian caviar, and all of that, and nothing about the contemporary art. But anyway, that, I think, was a very good foundation, because when I began to work there, I found the environment, the ambience was perfect. I mean, they let me do what I want. They opened all the studios to me, and it was like paradise for me. I never had that much facility in my life. And there I was working like day and night, from early morning to late night. And Sia Armejani at that time was a student of the McAllister College studying philosophy. And he was interested in art. And he came during the night after his school to visit me. And we sat down and we had coffee and chat. And he was very interested about what is happening in Iran, the art scenes, and what I had the newest news for him, and I told him, about the latest things, what was going on in Iran. And then, of course, Marco Grigorian at that time was in New York. And in one of my visits to New York, I saw him, and I thought, he should join us. He should come to Minneapolis, especially because he was not financially well in New York, and he was struggling. And so I said, at least you can come there and teach there and stay with me. And he did come, and in fact, everything worked out very, very nicely. And so after a while, he opened a gallery, and with three of us exhibited our works, and even invited some of the artists from abroad, from Paris, like Zenderudi, like Saidi, and other artists, well-known artists, and exhibited all together. So we saw each other regularly, once or twice a week. We went to see exhibition regularly, and that was about the time of the birth of pop art. And there were all kind of hot news those days reaching to Minneapolis, and there was debates between the abstract expressionists and pop artists. I mean, some of the younger people here don't remember that were really hot days. And abstract expressionists were a very strong group, and they had roots everywhere practically. And the pop artists were a bunch of youngsters, and they they just couldn't take them seriously. I mean, and this struggle, it was interesting, and we were following, Sia and I, and Marco, of course, was not a pop artist, pop man. He was against it, and he was kind of, defending the abstract expressionists and all the previous trends, and Sia and I. So we had a lot of nice time together, from arguments to drinking to chatting to working together, showing together. It was good old days.
I'd love to talk about this incredible juggling of thematics that you've had in the context of your work. And personally, I'm absolutely in love with your works pertaining to the lion thematic. And I know that you're going to be working on an exhibition with regards to the lion. And there's a beautiful corner for your information in the exhibition about the Persian lion. So I would love for you to talk about the Persian lion and how it's played its role in your work.
Okay, great. Yes, I don't know why it got me into lion, but anyway, it was during Shiraz Festival of Arts before Revolution, Shiraz and Persepolis art festivals, one of the best festivals in the world in those days, that I had an exhibition in Shiraz, and for the first time I saw a lion rug, and it was incredible. I couldn't believe it, that this was made by a rug weaver. It was so much different. It was so abstract and so wild. I mean, it's like abstract expressionists draw that lion. I mean, beautiful. And I couldn't, and I asked, and I said, this is done by a Qashqai tribal woman. I mean, no artist was behind it, and it's about 100 years old. I mean, so forth. So I bought that, and just, the destiny brought more lions to me. And in less than a few weeks, I had half a dozen of lion rugs, and one different than another. And so I decided to follow this up, and nobody knew anything about it. So I made more trips to south of Iran, to Shiraz, to Isfahan, elsewhere, looking for lion rugs. And then I found out who are the maker of these lions and who are the creators, and where are the mines, and I found they are all in the tribal tents. And so I started to traveling through the Bakhtiyari and Qashqai tribes of Iran. Fascinating in the lifestyle they have. They migrate from south of Iran to Persian Gulf, from Persian Gulf to middle of Iran, to the height of the mountains, and by their herds, by horses, camels, and a fascinating life. And there I saw more lion rugs, and I saw stone lions they place on the tomb of their warriors, and the warriors and those who are martyrs and who are brave men. The stone lions were the first sculptures in Islamic land I was seeing, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, these were all very new to me, and still new to many people, because they are all hidden. And anyway, those were like my love start for lion. And I found out this has a much deeper, much older root than 100 or 200 years. And so I searched for it, and I don't get into that. I have written several books about this. But to make it brief, when I was doing all this research, I ran into a New Zealander geologist who was teaching in Shiraz University in those days, in mid-60s, early 70s. And in talking with him, he said, you know what? A couple of years ago, I ran into a carcass of an animal. I thought it was a donkey. I pulled out 2 teeth from the animal, and then I took it to London, to British Museum, and they said, this is a lion. This is a Persian lion. This belonged to a Persian lion. And, I couldn't believe it. So I realized that the last lion, this was probably the last lion, because there is no other traces that another lion was seen. And this last lion, I went to the exact spot that the man had told me. And, I searched everywhere. Of course, there was nothing, but after some years, there was nothing left. And that all of this happened in 1965. And so we decided that the reason I say we decided, because it's not me alone. We have some association of, in Iran, who work for the animal protectors, and they are all freelance, and they are my friends in London who are here, Meshkatis, and we make rather than an ordinary exhibition, we make an exhibition dedicated to the lion of Iran, and in memory of the lion in Iran. Hopefully, that other big mammals are better taken care of, And so since then, I have added to the body of my lion subjects. And so the exhibition in London is going to be fully of lion subject. There are lion rugs, lion sculptures, lion lithography. You only see a few of them here.
Lions make a great segue, actually, to your interest in the kind of material culture of Iran, in the sort of popular decorative motifs of everyday objects and the ways that you have studied those. I'm curious about that because that appears in your work, but it also appears in your books. And we had, of anything, the most difficulty getting those books across the border of everything. The books were held up for ages as though books printed in Iran somehow, posed a crisis. But anyway, it was fantastic to open those boxes and to see these beautiful books, and they're all on view in the gallery. So maybe you could talk about that.
What was the question, sorry?
About about the impulse, the interest in that kind of material culture and the research you've done.
Okay, my researches, yes. The lion rag was my first research. And then the Textile Museum of Washington expressed, willingness to show the collection of lion rags because they were not known. Nobody knew about such a collection, such lion rags. And in 1963, we had an exhibition of lion rags in Washington, D.C. Then a Smithsonian Institution took it over and circulated throughout the United States. And this, they asked me, I expected them to make a catalog and write about them, but then at the end they came to me and said, nobody knows about lion rags. Can you yourself write about it? And I have never put a pen on paper. How can I write? And they said, okay, we'll help you. Anyway, I wrote the introduction to that catalog, and that kind of was my first time I made the research or I published the research. And then from that on, with my other collection, I was a bit more confident, more encouraged, and I followed that path. And then, of course, during the revolution, the first years of the revolution, Iranian wars, I had plenty of time. There was no fuel, no electricity, and nothing else I could do. And the best was to keep myself busy with reading, writing, and that sort of thing, or traveling, going throughout Iran. And that kind of accumulated a mine of information for me, which I still am using it up. And from time to time, I publish some of that in a group of objects or group of, as Lisa said, material and culture.
So we've talked in the material related to this exhibition about one of the reasons why you're really the perfect person to inaugurate the Eisler Fund is because you've been a scholar and a teacher and a collector and a curator as well as being an artist. And you've said that all those roles kind of bleed into each other. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about some of the shows that you've curated. So and pick which one you'd like to talk about a little bit. You curated the first exhibition of Iranian modern art to be seen in the United States in 1962. You curated one of the first exhibitions of modern Iranian art to be seen in Tehran in the marble lobby of a bank, right? In Banque Saderat in 1961. You curated a major exhibition of what was then called Black African art in Tehran in 1977, which I covered. I had a TV show for kids in Iran, and we went to the museum and covered that show. I remember it very specifically, and I think there's probably other people in this room that remember that exhibition. You curated shows of locks. You had a show that had, 1,000 locks?
Yeah, for a Smithsonian Institution, yes. But that was bicentennial, yes. Iran participation in American Bicentennial.
So if you could talk a little bit about, what draws you to curating and give us some curating stories.
Well, I tell you, I didn't know even what curator is, what it means. I mean, when I did those things, it was just a necessity to do it. There was nobody else to do it. So I kind of gathered a group of artwork and had an exhibited in Minneapolis when I went there. But perhaps the first major job that I did can be called curated. It was the African art. Under the auspices of the Queen of Iran, a set of projects were planned that was called Communication Through Cultures. And among them was to introduce other cultures to Iranians. And the first one was for introduce the art of Black Africa. And I was chosen as a curator, organizer of the show, not organizer, but the curator. So I traveled to all Western African countries, and I was treated, VIP, with red carpet, because I was kind of like coming from the representative of the royalty. And so I went to see, I saw all this museum, they showed me a bit of the tribal life, and I went to some of the, workshops and artisans who were doing this, and I gradually, I was so interested, I got so involved, and I found there is a lot in common between my work and African art, and I didn't know it, and this was unconsciously something mutual between us. And of course, it was a great sign for me, and I managed to bring the best of West African art to Tehran. The kind of artwork that they wouldn't have, they didn't even loan to British Museum. Bronze sculpture from Ife from 800, 900 years old, and very rare pieces, very costly, expensive pieces, and we managed to borrow all of that and bring to Tehran and exhibit it in a beautiful old palace in Tehran. A lot of people who visited that show, the scholar, then we invited the scholar for symposium from all Europe, and they came and they were astonished. They couldn't believe it. Such exhibition can be held in Tehran, and they couldn't even believe how did we borrow all of this, who did lend it to us. But all of this happened. Anyway, there were others to be done. Next was this South American art, which, the revolution came by, and that was never realized, but a lot of work was prepared for that too. And the rest of things, my group art shows, it was a necessity, as I said. Those days, modern art was very, very small in Iran. The majority of Iranian artists were, academists and against the modern art. And also the people were their followers, not our followers. Very few people followed us. So we had to get together. We had to work in group. It was a necessity. And that's why this bank show or the later other shows that, I had a role to organizing, we couldn't do without it to introduce ourselves.
I have a question about this kind of the perception that this is a new field of interest in the contemporary Middle Eastern art. And it seems like you are the perfect person to speak to this, because your work has set records at auction in Dubai for Christie's, for a living contemporary Middle Eastern artist, and for the auction house in the UAE. And I wonder if you can talk about this kind of surge that you see in interest.
I was shocked myself when I heard it. And the piece didn't even belong to me, so the money didn't go all to my pocket. But I'm happy it happened. I'm happy. The artwork was purchased by a bank, but they were very smart, because they probably knew what they are doing. And yes, that happened and set a record. That's true, still is the record in the Middle East. But anyway, it didn't really change my lifestyle. It didn't. I'm still the same man. I'm in the same lifestyle. I am more like a constructor in my studio rather than a fancy artist. I am always in my working clothes, eating with my workers and living with them, and we have a good time. And so truly this question also was asked by a reporter the other day from me. I said, no, didn't change me. The market didn't change me at all. I'm glad it didn't. I don't want to be changed by the market, you know. I don't need that money. I don't need that much money. I need enough money, but I don't need that kind of a big money. What do I do with it? Anyway, that's the story.
I remember when that happened, I saw Parviz and I said, how are you doing? He's like, and he was speaking in Farsi very emphatically. And he said, I had to change my phone number. Everyone kept calling. They think I'm a factory now. I'm going to keep making the same sculpture that's sold at auction. Everyone wants one of those now, you know. And he was very like annoyed and frustrated by the way people were kind of reacting to this post-auction fever, you know?
Yes, I was receiving phone calls from United States, guys saying, you know, we went to school together. You remember me? I mean, after 60 years of... And do you have any other thing left? I mean... And neighbors with, you know, their child and their maid knocking on the doors. I said, listen, I mean, we live here together, we are neighbors, I'm here for years, and how come you just coming to ask me? You say, well, we didn't know you are a sculptor. Anyway, that's life. But no, not really, no. Everything remained the same.
Maybe one final question before we open it up to the floor. Your mind is incredibly complex, and your interests have been so varied. We know what you've been doing all throughout the years. The themes are presented downstairs. I would be most interested to know what preoccupies you today at night. What do you think about?
Very interesting question. And it is a bit familiar because my wife always says that. Because, are you here? Are you not here? Anyway, and when I am here, she says, okay, you are a part-time husband when, of course, you are not here 2 seasons, but when you are here, you still are part-time husband because you are not at home. I don't know where you are. Anyway, yeah, when you do different things, which I do now, I don't know what got me into this, but I love them all. When you do sculpting and painting and research and, you know, all of this, a bit of unfinished of each remains in your head, and your computer keeps working on them and does not close down. And this computer is also very old, and I have to bang it because it's not so speedy, not so fast. And so, you know, sometimes it is all of this together, the complex of all of this together. Sometimes they help each other, sometimes they don't help each other. But somehow I have managed to do them all. And I have made myself some kind of a daily itinerary program, and which had worked so far very good. I mean, in the morning, where my mind is more fresh, I write and I make whatever takes a bit of memory, a bit of brain. And in the afternoon, I go to the studio and work there. There I don't need any brain because I just have to continue working. And my sculptures are, you know, I know it, you know, by closed eyes, and even the computer is shut off, I can still do them. So this has been a good combination of dividing my time and my days and working them all out.
Shall we open to questions from the room?
We have
Yes.
a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tanavoli. It's so great to see you again. You mentioned African art being so similar to Iranian art, which is very interesting, but you've seen the world, you've seen all kinds of cultural art. What other nations or cultural art do you think resembles? And
Well, I think I said African art resembled, was close to my art, not to Iranian art. But anyway, I think somehow all arts are related, and somehow there are, they all can be found. I mean, this is a long discussion. We don't want to get into this. But as far as African art goes, African art has great expressions. I mean, a very, let's say, straightforward. I mean, is nothing is hidden, and man is man, woman is man, and anger is anger, love is love, and mother and child is very. And it is. It's not also. It's also work of people who are, I think, very direct, and I liked all of that, and that is what I found some resemblance between them and myself.
You obviously said many times that you like traditional Iranian poetry and perhaps modern ones too, I imagine. I've seen some of the ones. How do you relate words to your work? Can I ask that? It's a kind of silly question perhaps, but it's very important.
Yes. No, it is not a silly question. When I was in my early works, practically I wrote some of my poem because nobody wanted to read any of my poetries, and so I began with poetry on the body of my sculptures. I mean, if you see some of my early bronzes or my copper works and some of the words, and you can find not all of it, but you can symbolically see some of those words. But then later, I gave up the poetry and I was stuck with sculpture. I mean, all I did was sculpting, and but I didn't give up the idea of poetry. And then I replaced Farhad, which I made the introduction, with poet. Nobody in the state knew about Farhad. Nobody knows who Farhad is. And it was a long story I don't want to explain to everyone. I just called my Farhad's poets. And it worked out. And so these poets, then gradually, my writing appeared on the body of my poets. You will see some of my sculpture. But these writings are not poetry. They are abstract writings. I like the look of Persian writing or Arabic writing. And these appear on the body of my poets. And so how else do you make a statue of a poet? I mean, I thought the best is if I either fill up the head with writings, I mean, not inside, of course, you cannot do it, or the body. And so some of my poets are half writing and half playing. And also, out of the writing, the word "heech," which I chose, I found that that's a book of poetry by itself. I mean, so meaningful. There is so many dimensions into that word, into the word of nothingness, that I don't need to go elsewhere. I just stick to that would make it. Yes.
Someone on Instagram said the show is Heech-tastic. Can I just introduce, this is Faryar Jawahirian, who is here with us, and she's a visiting scholar in Boston at Harvard? MIT, sorry. And Faryar has actually curated some shows in which Parviz Tanavoli's art has been exhibited in Tehran. So they have a long-standing professional and personal friendship.
I wanted to know if there are any artists in the world who at any time have inspired you.
Oh, good question.
So the question is, Faryar asked, what artists inspire? If there are any artists who inspire his work.
Well, to be honest with you, at the beginning I was very much influenced by my teacher, Marino Marini, very much so, and Emilio Greco, Italian modern masters. But then this faded gradually. And if I tell you no one today, don't think I'm presumptuous, no. My inspiration all come from my culture, Iranian, Persian culture. And I feel that's enough. I mean, although some people tell me you don't fit into the contemporary art, to the modern art. I say, okay, but I'm still living. There is still room for me. What do you want me to do? Nobody is rejecting me. Nobody is telling me go to hell. I mean, I'm living my life. So why should I change? Anyway, I don't feel I need it, you know. And these are decays and decays, not the last few years. This is happening to me. Yes, please.
You said earlier that the revolution also affected your art.
Sorry?
The revolution and what else you said?
The impact of the Iranian Revolution on
Yes,
art.
yes, on the art. Oh, on my art. On my art, not much. I continued the same. But it did revolutionize many artists, many youngsters. I mean, the first, at least 10 years of the revolution, we have a new art developed in Iran that we call it bloody art. I mean, this is all art of the war and blood and posters and slogans and that sort of things. And very interesting, actually. And articles and books have been written about it. But later, it didn't stay too long. I mean, with the emergence of a new generation, that it further developed, and now the Iranian art is very, very varied and very, I can say international. I mean, you can find all sorts of direction and taste in Iranian contemporary art.
We have a question back there.
Yes.
Hi. Closer to the beginning of your show, you had said that you didn't have any regrets left in your artwork. You're also an extremely notable and proficient Iranian artist. I would just like to know, what sort of impression are you hoping to leave on those coming after you in this field?
After me, like generation after me? I see. I don't know. I mean, I asked my son to don't follow me. I mean, it's not an easy life. But others, I mean, I have a lot of students, but I never encourage them to follow me. I really don't, because each of them are a different person, they have different ideas, different concepts. I try to keep them the same they are. And in fact, I sometimes ask them to not follow me. I mean, just try to find themselves. And so it's hard to predict what is going to happen in the future. Yes.
When did you know that you were an artist? And growing up, was it hard to be an artist in your culture? And how did your parents react and support that? Or
Well, interesting question. I really didn't know anything about art, and somebody even asked, was anybody in your family an artist? No. The answer is no. But from childhood, I liked to work with my hands and to build things. You know, I had a hacksaw and a small nail and few nails and a few hammers and that sort of thing. And I built tables, chairs, and instead of going to the road, to the streets, which those days children went to the street and played, and I stayed home and built things with my hands. And of course, these were not art, and I don't remember even if I ever was a good painter at the school. I don't think so. I wasn't, and I had no training. But I think it was music that woke me up, and I was very sensitive to music, and I anytime listened to music or poetry, because in those days, Iranian radio played good music and recite good poetry from the Persian classical poets, and I was fascinated. I never wanted to miss those. I was very young. And then, of course, when I grew a little older, I started with violin, and it was about my working. My father wanted to paint the house doors and hiring a painter. And I thought I can do it myself. I mean, those doors now, the old days are made out of wood, and every 2-3 years, because of the sun heat of Tehran, you had to paint them out. And I thought I'd do it. And he said, okay, if you can do it, I pay the same amount to you. And with that money, I went and bought violin, thinking that I can play it right away. I brought the violin home, and very disappointing, I couldn't play it at all. And then I learned that I have to go to a teacher. And, I mean, step by step. And so these were like my foundations. And then it was later, it was in high school that I kind of liked to paint, and I went to an art school after my high school. It was a kind of a Kamal el-Mulk school, a free school. And then I spent a couple of days, 3-4 days there. When they announced that the first school of art is going to be open and they are going to have sculpture courses, I thought, well, let's try that. I mean, I went and registered for that. But at the end of the registration, at the end of the time, they told me, unfortunately, we cannot open the class because you are the only one. Everybody has registered for painting and for other fields, not sculpture. And so I begged my brother, said, can you come and register? My poor brother wanted to become architects, and he said, okay, I'm come and register. And so we both went and registered in sculpture. And then, so that was the first school of sculpture in 1952, I believe it was. And so that was very good. Although, and then the next problem was there was no teacher. So they hired the painter who had come back from Paris and who had taken some courses in sculpting and said, okay, you know a little better than others. And he taught us for the first or second years. And then at the end, the last year, a sculptor, an army man who was sent to Brussels to learn how to make the figure of the king, the Shah, had returned to work for the army, because those days any square they made, a new government building or anything had to have a portrait or bust of the Shah or so forth, or the full statue. And so he became the colonel became my teacher. And he was very nice man, academic, but very restrict in academy. I had to learn, everything, hair by hair, he said. You have to make the face hair by hair. But that was a good introduction. Then, of course, I went to Italy and continued.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Did you have a question, Professor?
I did want to ask a question about you. Thank you for all of your graciousness and sharing your stories with us, first of all. When you're in a retrospective exhibition, there's work that comes together from many different parts of the world. They don't live in the same place, and suddenly here they all are. I wonder what your thoughts are now, walking through the exhibition and seeing a lot of work that's scattered, talking to each other.
Very good, very good. You cannot believe me. You cannot. When I walked in, I couldn't believe it with my eyes. It was years and years that I hadn't seen all my work together, or even a portion of it, because my work are spread around, some at home, some in the studio, some at the foundry, and here and there, some hidden here or there. And anyway, and I cannot find words to thank the museum, Davis Museum, their organizer, Lisa Fischman and Shiva Balaghi, how they made it in such a short time. Unbelievable. I thought they worked round the clock to do this, because sometimes I received email from them at 2:00 after midnight. They had questions, and intelligent questions, I had to reply. And so it's really, all the thanks goes to them. I didn't do anything. I just produced a sculpture.
But you know, there was a feel to the way Parviz displays his art, and we tried when Lisa and I were sketching out ideas of how to organize it. We were very much inspired by his own curatorial impulse. So he has kind of vitrines filled with hiches in his house, and he has kind of steps in which he's got groupings of Farhad. And so we kind of tried to, we took the curatorial sensibility very much from the way he shows his own art in his own house. And all of his houses, both his house in Tehran and his house in Vancouver, are designed to exhibit his art. So they're all built with open space. And Manije, his partner, truly his partner, studied design in school. And I was asking her because Parviz was actually her professor. She studied sculpture under Parviz, and apparently you were very, very strict.
Very strict.
With him,
Still
yes.
am.
And she complained bitterly
Serious.
that he used to give her very bad marks. And then she studied painting with Sohrab Sepehri. So I think that there's also you can see her aesthetic sensibility, and her relationship with the work, you can tell, has very much influenced his own aesthetic sensibility. Is that a fair statement?
Thank you. Yes, you couldn't say. I couldn't say it any better. You saved me.
There's always girl power wherever you look.
Of course, of course. By the way, this exhibition really is done by 3 girls, after all. Maryam Eisler is the engine, and these 2 young ladies. Really, if it wasn't because of their efforts, it couldn't have taken place. I mean, I know they put love in it, enthusiasm, and it couldn't be any better. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone, please come and join us in the lobby of the Davis for a reception. You can go and see the exhibition. You can speak with the artist. And thank you for being here.